Within Paravent Walls, a widow's portrait. Ladies and gentlemen, you are now looking at the last portrait of Estefania von Zweighaupt, born Viennese, the 55-year-old moribund widow of the renowned artist Severin von Zweighaupt, completed 3 months prior to her death. The insular painter Guillaume Camigliano, requested by Estefania herself, agreed to eternalize the woman struck by a lifelong malaise on canvas, under the sole condition that he would not be forced to look her in the eyes. The accomplishment of the portrait was the greatest testament to his faith, he claimed. By the time he painted Estefania's features, her appearance had already been hag-ridden and struck by sheer madness and delusion. But he still did what so many other male painters did before him. He created an idol. Nobody was better fitted to enjoy idolization than Estefania, and she revered every instant of Camigliano's gilding gaze, scavenging her face and body, ignoring her deflecting eyes. The triumph for Camigliano was that he found his truth of Estefania by disregarding hers, which had always been an established fact. But she deliberately embraced his intentions to cover it up. This museum compels you to look at the end of human life, the beauty and ugliness orbiting it, and the truth of all the individuals who have lived in this mansion. Museum and mansion became one under Estefania's and Severin's ill-fated marriage. And I caution you, every piece of art that you will encounter bears its own story and perspective. It is easy to get absorbed, to get drawn into them and their inner mechanisms, because nothing bears more life than the human imagination coming into contact with a work of art. For Camigliano, the hunchback maestro who painted bowing to the portrait, the intensity of avoiding direct eye contact with Estefania ignited his imagination and energy to such a degree that his creativity reached a transcendental state. He made her soul transparent with the strokes of his brushes. Once completed, Camigliano turned his back on the pre-mortem painting, on Estefania, on the countless hours, and lived with its mental duplicate until he too was no more. On the oval-framed painting, Estefania has a glacial peppercorn-colored stare underneath a pair of perfectly arched eyebrows. In truth, her eyes had already faded into a smothered ochre color, and her eyebrows looked like a disarranged puzzle of mummified hair. The idealized widow has well-spread facial freckles, the color of dark roasted coffee, and 2 mischievous wrinkles next to the crevice in between her beetroot-colored lips. Again, in reality, her complexion had already degenerated into such a translucency that one could see the blue veins through her sick skin. Camigliano painted what once was, and the vivacity of the widow's lips resembled 2 leaking snails. The yolk-yellow gown that the widow von Zweighaupt is wearing here gives her a heavier and healthier posture. The entire sleeves, the décolletage, and the hips had been upholstered to hint at fertility, represent femininity, and project virility. Underneath the grey layers of cotton and silk, her deteriorating yellowish skin enveloped the material with a viscid smell. The nurse in attendance spilled the secret that because the painting process was done in close quarters, the widow suffocated her lower body with voluptuous cloth, so the thigh-warming odor did not transcend to her nostrils or Camigliano's, because it was quite nauseating. As you can see, a pair of daffodil yellow gloves and an amber crystal egg are lying on the desk she is leaning on. And if you look at Estefania's hands, you can behold something quite remarkable. Her hands are the only body part that Camigliano painted as they were, in a thick and lifeless tone of yellow, like the filter of a cigarette that has been subjected to a dirty tongue and teeth. The gloves stand in direct opposition to her hands and expose the painting's truth. The haggard widow wished to be preserved on canvas, as she could not allow the world to forget that she had existed. The more you observe the movements within the portrait and release your imagination, the more you will detect how the thick fabric engulfing her silhouette resembles waves of loose skin trying to fluff up her shrinking muscles and shredding bones. Poor Estefania spent her days and nights softening within her antique bed, complying with uncontrollable muscle spasms in her limbs and awaiting frequent shivers from deep down to crawl their immaculate way to the surface. She would push her body into the sheets, pressing it onto mattress, stiffening her corpus as her tongue lurked embedded in her mouth like a stranded and undercooked piece of meat, immovable and floppy. Her teeth would clatter in an uproar against the fleshy hindrance, and she would force her hands under her buttocks. I will not think of it. I must feel it. I must live it. I must die with it. But what I can control are my thoughts, the widow used to claim. Untimely entombed in her own body, she was doomed to disintegrate amongst her stained blankets like a 19th century invalid, and wait for the disease to swallow her whole. The vain widow attributed her derelict physicality to a curse, pledging she had done nothing to deserve this insufferable state. Never did she consider that she had been a woman more concerned with death than with life. If a taste could be assigned to this exuberant femme d'artiste, it would be the mournful and traumatic taste of excessive salt. In contrast to her husband, who was buried in the Zweighaupt family mausoleum in a secluded part of the public cemetery that marks the tripoint between our country and two others, Estefania was buried in the rapturous heart of the front garden of this very mansion, as her remains had been denied access to the mausoleum decades earlier by none other than her mother-in-law, who never stopped holding a grudge against her. If one can trust Estefania's nurse, this burial arrangement might have been for the better, as the widow is believed to have said that after sleeping for years next to someone who fears you, abhors you, and whose love and devotion is to want you dead, she didn't want that destabilizing force extending into her afterlife. As you can see here in the portrait, she is holding a portable blackboard in her right hand and 3 pieces of chalk in her left hand next to the crystal egg. If you look closely, a mirror-inverted word can be detected on the blackboard. Allerbach. It's in reference to her daughter, Gabriela, the nerve-wrecker, as she called her toward the end of her life. Ladies and gentlemen, your history starts with your mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers. You may be swimming against the stream, or you may be holding on to those very roots, but whatever you are doing, you are never without them. Your lives are a reaction to them, good or bad. Every love story contains 6 people from the very beginning, in one form or another. Replicate them, get rid of them, but they existed, and cutting off their influence is a lifelong struggle that not all of us survive wholeheartedly.